I think if you really want to be an others-oriented leader and you care more about the people around you than you do yourself, you should be motivated to avoid, those folks suffering the consequences of your lack of preparation today for something you want to do tomorrow.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. On this show, we bring you ideas and insights from construction leaders across the country every single week to help you lead more effectively. This episode is brought to you by the Simple Sales Pipeline. If right now you and your team are not forecasting effectively with consistency and discipline, you are flying blind into the future. An easy way to solve that in 30 minutes or less is checking out thesimplesalespipeline.com. This is not a CRM. This is a simple sales pipeline. And if it sounds magical and you're wondering who made it, we did. After working with our clients for the last 5 and 6 years, helping them organize and value their sales pipelines better, we finally made the 2-year and very expensive decision to make a web application. It's here now. We believe it lives up to all its promises. It is super simple and it can help you immediately. Check out thesimplesalespipeline.com. All right, then let's talk about our guest. His name is Mr. Levi Smith. He's the CEO and president of Franklin Building Supply, headquartered in Boise, Idaho. Levi graduated from Washington University in St. Louis and then got his JD. That's right, his Juris Doctor. Yeah, that's right, a law degree. So, do you know what the Juris stands for? It's abbreviated for jurisprudence. That's right, Levi Smith is a doctor of jurisprudence. Pretty impressive. That's why we wanted to talk to him. Levi is an entrepreneur at heart. He has started multiple companies before being extracted from Austin, Texas, and moving to Boise to help lead Franklin Building Supply. As you'll hear, Levi is smart, he's funny, he's really well-read, and he's easy to listen to. And I took so many notes that I immediately turned around and started applying to our own business as a result of talking to him. So we talk about how to accelerate your path to leadership. We talk about 10x problem solving, and we talk about the difference between step thinking and stretch thinking and why the difference between the two is so meaningful. We talk about all of that and more. You, my friends, you're in for a treat. Please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Levi Smith, President and CEO of Franklin Building Supply. As always, thank you for listening. So, Mr. Levi Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. No, man, I've really enjoyed listening to you speak on leadership and seeing you in action, and obviously working with several of the folks that you work with and hearing their comments about you. So now I'm super excited here. I think we need to start at the beginning because I always get a little bit of butterflies as we're kind of preparing for this and, want to make valuable use of everyone's time, including yours. This one was a little bit more intense in my preparation because you were one of the OG podcasters back in 2013, 2014, and you had some incredible guests. Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk, Roy Spence. Give me the high level. What was that like? And how'd you get those guys on the show? I mean, I don't know. I'm blown away by this whole thing.
Well, I think some of it has to do with, there weren't a lot of people doing podcasts. So, they had a lot fewer outlets. I mean, imagine, the first radio or television shows. People were like, well, I guess so. No, I mean, I wasn't that early. I wasn't bleeding edge. But I think I found that medium really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I was in a season where I thought that I could do that for a year, have some conversations that I was interested in having.
Sure.
And I did it for a year, realized it was, you and I have talked before about just kind of the tool set back then. It wasn't fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
It involved a good bit more work, especially in the post-production than I had anticipated.
Yes.
But no, those guys and everybody else that participated that year that I did that were super gracious. And I just made an ask. So I made an ask of some people who I respected and valued their opinion and take on leadership and culture in particular. That's what I was, focused on. And so those guys and several others were super gracious to do that. And I think if I was, competing for their time and attention today, I would be low on the totem pole.
Could be. Now, I want to ask you, just now you referenced a season. You said back then you were in a season. Do you think of your life in seasons, or is that just a turn of phrase? That struck me as something.
I absolutely think of my life in seasons. So I describe myself, like I think I kind of subscribe to a philosophy where I think a lot of people either fit into kind of categories of being sprinters or marathoners.
Okay.
And the marathoners sort of enjoy just a relentless pace. They maybe have more stamina for doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's the folks that can, that I look at in awe in the gym that can, run 20 miles on the treadmill or whatever. It's like, I'm asking why, but, then I'm wondering how. So, those folks have something else in their makeup that allows them to do that and to pursue that type of challenge. So I'm more of a sprinter, not just physically. I'm actually better at sprinting than running marathons. And if this was on video, people would be nodding right now, maybe questioning the sprinter thing. I mean, back in the day, it's unbelievable. But I'm better at sort of short bursts where I think about really intensely investing in a particular area of life, personally, professionally, or an organization for a season. And it doesn't mean that I don't then maintain that, but I even talk about it internally here at Franklin Building Supply, like that's going to go into a continuous improvement sort of cycle. Yeah. And that's where we're going to maintain that. But that's different than what it takes to get something going and to get something off to the ground or to effectuate a tremendous amount of change. And so both personally and professionally, I think about life in seasons and have seasons that are easy, have seasons that are hard, seasons that are difficult, seasons that are rewarding. But, for me, it's helpful, not to go into like doing those podcasts thinking about, okay, well, what if I did podcasts for the next 20 years? I just said, yes, I'm going to do this for a year. I'm going to dive into this topic. So I'll do that even with reading or other things that I'll kind of explore, dive into, I'll make that a focus for a period of time. And then, typically pick something else up. So,
yeah. And I tend to think about this idea of getting something new where it takes a lot of energy and focus to like get some escape velocity.
Right.
Once you break through that orbit, for me, and I think it sounds like for you as well, and for other leaders, that's my sweet spot. Now, once we just have to come up with a process and we just have to do this because this is the best way to do it and we have to monitor it.
Right.
My mind goes to someplace else.
Well, I'm thinking about the next launch pad, right? And keeping stuff in orbit is a different category for me. So I also sort of agree with that, kind of metaphor. And I think, man, as soon as we get something in orbit and we can maintain that and just make continuous improvements, small ones along the way, that's a different deal than how do we even get this off the ground? Or is this what we should even be pursuing? Yeah. There's no valor in launching a rocket to the wrong destination. So.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I also been thinking more just about kind of seasons and just kind of, I see you got the Cowboys helmet, you got a picture of Michael Irvin up there. Obviously, no shortage of sports cliches comes from my mouth. But I also think of like seasons in terms of like teams. And sometimes you have a really good run and this is just how it goes. And sometimes you're not going to build a team to last 20 seasons. Some people are going to come, some people are going to go, they're going to serve a role. Sometimes it's not a right fit. But I think obviously you're operating a much larger scale than I am. But I'm trying to think about, hey, sometimes through the best effort and intentions, the season ran out. It was a good season, and we're both going to go away, and we can do that.
Are we in a rebuilding season now?
Oh,
right.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, just to name it. So language is important here. I think it's really helpful for people to have a label on these kind of time periods And for me, again, it's a helpful way to just kind of frame life personally and professionally. And I like having some starts and I like having some ends. There's certainly things that are maintained, but I think it also gives you some freedom to move on from some things in a healthy way and not think that, man, one of the things that I do personally and advocate my team does is, maintain what I call stop doing lists, where you need to prune. You can't just perpetually, sort of grow this rose bush that, just continues to grow. Any effective gardener knows that to get the best yield, you've got to do some pruning. And I think about that both personally and professionally. You've got to do some pruning and give yourself permission to say, I need to stop doing this, or this has come to an end, or even getting into something and not thinking that this is going to last in perpetuity.
Yeah. Can you go into this on a more kind of behavioral level of going from leadership into management? Are there tactics or things that you've been able to do to say, listen, we can't just continually add more stuff? I think of the college bar scene. At a certain point, it's one person in, one person out.
Right.
And you can't just continue packing stuff in. Maybe that gives you a little insight to how my college experience was.
It sounds like a still present experience, maybe.
Could be some weeks, sure. How do you take that idea and help managers on your team to go actually put that in, where you can say, hey, walk me through this. We identified that you're overloading your list. You're spending more time on these things. Show me how you are actively pruning these activities.
So I think a big part of it in a role that I'm in as CEO and president of Franklin Building Supply is giving managers, leaders, teams permission to even take some stuff off the table. So I was with the team today working on some stuff, and one of the things I said to them was, you need to give yourself longer to get this done. So I think you're making an assumption. I think most people make an assumption that their boss wants things to be done yesterday.
Yeah.
And whether it's intentional or it's, inadvertent, I think a lot of bosses and a lot of managers and leaders basically do communicate that in the way they talk about things and the way they communicate timelines, et cetera. So what my team hears more from me is, what are we cutting to get this done? Mm-hmm. Is this timeline realistic? This seems like you're just adding time. Help me understand where time is being taken away from another initiative. If we just made this a priority, top priority, what's dropping to the bottom of the list now? So I think even just giving people permission more than anything else, I think most people know how to do this, the mechanics of doing this, but they just don't feel like they're in an environment where it's allowed. And in some cases, they're just making an assumption, but it's not a bad assumption to make. In a lot of environments, it's not really allowed. And I think if you're not explicit and you don't really counter the additive nature of work, and you don't give language around pruning and sort of stop doing lists and where are we going to cut and how do we get this work on your plate without you working more than X number of hours a day or a week. If you don't have that conversation, they're going to make an assumption that you're saying, hey, I just think that you can basically always pile more, work on and figure it out.
Yeah, and I can imagine that you modeling that at the top, there's the implicit direction that, hey, when you as a manager are then communicating initiatives and projects to the team below you, we're inherently going to be talking about trade-offs, and you can't just pile it up. Is there any way that you see outside of just observing and hearing people talk to know that what you're modeling is really filtering down and cascading through the organization?
I think it is very observable, but I'll tell you, I've been at Franklin Building Supply for coming up on 7 years in January. And one of the things we're really focused on right now is over a 7-year period, I think I've seen the desired sort of thinking and approach seep into our regional leadership and to our general manager and what we call kind of large department manager leadership, but it's not seeped all the way down to a lot of our frontline supervisors. And so we just have to be honest with ourselves that it's not seeped all the way down. Mm-hmm. And we actually have spent a lot of time this calendar year talking about how our frontline managers assume a pace that is not really expected of them from above, but it's just assumed by them. And that trickles down to a lot of the folks, just doing the day-to-day work in our locations. The stuff that actually, impacts our customers as we're building loads and getting stuff delivered. There's just this assumed sort of, pace. And again, additive nature that we can never cut anything. We're just always adding more and more and more, faster, faster, faster. And I think one of the most important obligations for any leader is to really be clear about priorities for their team and to be really clear about trade-offs that are being made. We can't do it all. What are we cutting? What are we saying no to? And so, I'll admit from, my perspective and for our organization, we can see it at certain levels, but we don't see it all the way down. And that's become a really important initiative for us, and a key part of, the current 5-year vision that we're operating under is to really be attentive to some things that have not seeped all the way in, not to the fault of the frontline supervisors, but really, because we haven't been effective in getting that, all the way down through the organization. So,
yeah, well, I can imagine just that awareness and putting language at, hey, this takes time. It's one thing to go and hear it once, but I like that. I like the verb seep. Like, it's culture, man. It just has to kind of get through the cracks and has to be around, and you have to kind of speak in it. It's interesting as you kind of talked about your next 5-year vision that you guys just recently rolled out, heard or saw some feedback, both of us did, for your previous 5-year vision. The quote was, newer employees thought that final goal from the previous 5-year vision was conservative. So the new people thought it was conservative. The seasoned employees thought it was a stretch. I've been thinking more about this, and I'm not sure if there's a there. I'm not sure if there's anything to build upon. But as you hear that, is part of that intuitive? Do you know this? And does it change the way that you communicate and you lead, knowing that this goal for some people is going to think, oh my God, it's impossible. And the other people are like, pretty sure we can do more than that. And still, it's a pretty, it's a goal. It's a pretty audacious goal you guys put out there. How do you think about that?
So I kind of think about this like, starting on a journey at sea. And I think the reality is when you launch a vision or initiative like this, and you've got, I think, a viable destination or goal, but it's a stretch. It's going to be a difficult journey. It's going to be a challenge. The issue is that everybody who's with you at the moment that's launched is coming from the perspective of leaving a land they're familiar with. Yep. And the destination seems very, very far off. Mm-hmm. And the challenges that you're going to, encounter are unknown. They don't know how rough the seas are. They don't know how easy it's going to be to navigate. And so they're so focused on what they're leaving that it's hard for them to really, fully get behind where they're going. And then, you set sail, you get on your way towards your destination. And in the middle of the sea, when there's no land to look at anymore, some of these new hires get dropped on the boat. And so, like, well,
yes.
Well, yeah, we can get to that destination. I mean, what's the alternative? I don't see any land around here. And so I think, they get dropped, onto the ship, onto the vessel in the middle of the journey. And and the benefit they have is they're not referencing where we've come from. Mm-hmm. Their only focal point is where we're headed to. But I think for existing team members, it takes time for them to stop focusing on what they left behind and what they knew before, and to set their eyes entirely on what's ahead and what's coming up and what the destination is. And so I think you do have to communicate to those teams differently, but I think that's actually a lot of momentum to take advantage of, because for those tenured employees that are maybe there at the beginning of that type of vision launch or other thing that you're taking on, as those newer people come on board, and again, they're just, all they know is the destination. They don't know, the land that was left behind. That's momentum that you can build on, and those folks, can help, really strengthen everyone's resolve to say, well, yeah, this is actually doable. So that's kind of how I think about it. So you got to get them to the point where they stop referencing, how far they have come from where they were to how close they are to where they're going.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Yeah. And I think to your point, what I'm hearing there too is that we know there's different audiences. We know their perspective is going to be different. We're going to communicate to them differently, but that's fascinating. As we think about just leadership in general. And we're thinking of kind of the path to that instead of a team, kind of our individual. You had mentioned just, I think, a fantastic anecdote personally of just how folks can accelerate their own path to leadership. What do you recommend, or maybe what sort of context do you give on, there's a way for you to speed your path to a leadership position if you want to do that?
Sure. So I think one of the things I really push back against in our organization and have in a variety of roles, over my career is that the only teacher is the passage of time. I think it's interesting to me that after folks finish grade school or maybe finish college, they basically assume that the acceleration of, sort of learning, that phase of life is in their rearview mirror. And now the only teacher is the passage of time. And it's not that time and experiences are bad teachers. They're really effective teachers. Problem is it's really slow because none of us have figured out how to speed up time, right? And so it's just slow. You're just having to wait for the minutes to go by to get better. And so what I tell our folks is you want to look for opportunities. And I think the opportunities are everywhere. And you're talking about podcasts themselves are a great opportunity to accelerate your way through the learning curve. And so don't just assume that, again, the only way to, accelerate learning is by going through grade school or college. Understand that as an adult, you can do the same. And so, I share with people, I've been reading on average 20 books a year since I was 20 years old. And so I'm 45 years old. Well, 20 books a year times 25 years is a lot of accumulated, either knowledge, experience, perspectives, ideas. And that accelerates how quickly you can be effective as a leader, maybe in a subject matter or whatever. And so for some folks, it's going to be books. For others, it's podcasts, or it's, watching, YouTube videos on things, or taking a masterclass thing. There are a ton of ways today for people to learn. And so I just really challenge our folks to figure out a way to accelerate their learning. Don't just wait for the passage of time to be your teacher. And so I think it's really critical. And I'm always surprised when I'm looking at folks who want to, step into another role in the future, and that's what they're communicating, and that's the path they want to be on. But they're not taking the steps today to get ready for that role tomorrow. And there's steps they could take. Instead, they're just waiting on time to solve the problem for them. And again, time is really slow.
That's such a great turn of phrase. It's just the only teacher is the passage of time. You're right. And I think of this phrase from, I think it was Charlie Tremendous Jones, is that you will be the same person 5 years from now as you are today, except for the books you read and the people you meet. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that, and they're like, well, okay, Levi, you're a big book reader. I'm not a really book reader. And I would say, listen, just listening to podcasts, number one, you can meet new people and new ideas from listening. And you got audiobooks. And by the way, in this industry, how much time do we spend in the car? We can just convert a portion of that. So I get it. Some people, adult learning theory, some people aren't going to learn the best way through books, but whether it's audio, whether it's video, whether it's book, there's a way.
There is a way. Yes. Find your way.
Yes.
I think it's critical to exercise some, discipline over this. It'd be like someone saying, well, I just can't find time to get, fit to do the things I want to do or whatever. That's a solvable problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so figure out a way to solve the problem, accelerate, your development as a leader, manager for whatever role that you're wanting. One of the other sort of phrases I use, I think, you don't want future customers, employees, colleagues to suffer the consequences of your lack of preparation. And that really is the way that I look at it. Your lack of preparation accumulated over months, years, or decades means that there will be customers, colleagues, employees that suffer the consequences. And I think if you really want to be an others-oriented leader and you care more about the people around you than you do yourself, you should be motivated to avoid, those folks suffering the consequences of your lack of preparation today for something you want to do tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So none of us will be perfect. We'll never all figure it out, but there are a lot of things you can do to put yourself in a much better position than you're in today.
Yeah, well, I can imagine somebody who are working at Franklin who wants to continue their career path and wants to grow up. The obvious question you're asking is, you want a leadership role? Tell me what you have done to prepare for this leadership role. And
Right.
if it's, you offered this class that I went through 18 months ago at Franklin, and what else? Like, what are you doing? How much do
Right.
you really want it? And this is also, it's a litmus test to, can you pass it? No one should be more self-interested in this than you.
Right.
What are you doing to prepare for
No,
it?
I tell folks, you're interviewing today for a position tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm interviewing somebody from the outside, I don't have the benefit of being able to reflect on how I've seen them work. I'm having to sit down with somebody and over a series of half-hour interviews or a few, 1-hour interviews over a period of time, I'm having to make a judgment call about an individual. And if you take a step back, it's like it's a high risk proposition, right? It's incredible that businesses work as well as they do. That we routinely do this. But when you're thinking about promoting people from within, you have a body of work to look at. And the body of work that matters to me is what you're doing today. You raising your hand and saying, I'm interested in that position, and then you don't have a good story to tell about how you've utilized your time over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years to prepare yourself for that role, it's not impressive. And so, I'm challenging folks to use your time well. In our industry, we have a disproportionate, number of men work in our industry. Us and other companies are working hard to change that. I think it's critical for us to have a lot more women in our business. But I'll tell you, with men in particular, they spend a whole lot of time catching up on sports. And I just go straight for that. And I say every moment that you spend catching up on sports news in the car, I'd prefer for you to invest that in getting better. And are you willing to do that? Do you want it bad enough? If you don't, and you want to, keep up to date on all the latest, greatest stats and trade rumors more than you want to prepare for a role in a year or two, that's fine. That's your choice. But it tells me something that's the choice that you're making. So,
Yeah. It's that I hadn't thought about this, and I think you articulated so well, is that you hear that quote, which is, hey, Levi, you want to dress not for the job that you have. It's for the job that you want. Sure. And you can spend a couple $100 and you could solve that problem.
Right.
You know what you should really be thinking about?
a tire's not hard to acquire.
What do you put in between your ears that can help you prepare for that? I love that. You've got several these turns of phrases. I'm just jotting these down. They're great. You mentioned something helping me prepare for not screwing up our podcast together. You said, I need to ask you about the lie of rising to the occasion. We're grown up with that. Is that, we're there and then this moment arises.
Right.
And, I think of growing up in the Jordan era around Chicago. Jordan, he rises to the occasion. He does it time and time again. He rises to the occasion. And you're like, that's a lie. Why is that a lie?
Absolutely. No, and Jordan's a great example, right? I love that ESPN series. I think it's, that they launched during COVID, which is well-timed, right? Everyone's stuck at home.
The Last Dance,
Right, The Last Dance, but really well done. So I think when I say the lie of preparation, I believe that you don't, or the lie of rising to the occasion, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your minimum level of preparation. And so you want to invest, again, the time, energy, effort, resources to prepare to be successful in the moments that are going to matter. And so you can't come away from watching The Last Dance without being persuaded that, what Jordan did different. I mean, granted, he had some natural God-given talent, but, what he did extremely well was prepare for the moments that were most challenging and that he handled better than anybody else. And so I think that's true in business too. You don't want to think, okay, well, when the difficult situation comes or the opportunity for that job comes or whatever, I'm going to rise to the occasion and, just be ready to perform or excel. You want to prepare today to put yourself in a position to know that you're going to be able to handle that well, do that well. And again, that has a lot to do with what you're doing today to be ready for something tomorrow. And I think the present is what I see from a leadership standpoint, folks not spending enough time and attention on. Again, they're just sort of always looking at what's ahead and assuming that, again, just the passage of time is what's going to get them there. And I'm wanting to know what they're doing with their time today. And so, again, I encourage folks, prepare today, get ready today, learn today, learn how to handle conflict better, learn how to communicate more effectively, learn how to motivate people, learn more about emotional intelligence. If you're going to be an effective manager or leader, you're also going to, have to play psychologist and psychiatrist sometimes, so why don't you read a little bit about that, learn more about grief, learn more, there are all kinds of things in addition to just basic business mechanics that you can learn about and you can equip yourself for. And then you shouldn't be surprised when you're successful down the road.
Yeah. And I think on that, I don't know. I know you're obviously, you mentioned a big reader. I have found, I kind of stumbled into it. There's just been a few projects or people that I've become fascinated with and kind of tie them to writing and some other things. It seems obvious in retrospect, but what I never did is I would never buy essentially 2 books on the same topic.
Okay.
You get 2 books and say you read one, you listen to one, arguably kind of at the same time, just back to back. It doesn't take too long to be like, oh yeah, same story, details, a little more nuance, a little more context. You read 2 books on the same subject, say on grief, someone who reports to you has a loved one pass away.
Right.
You read 2 books back to back or listen to one. You're not an expert, but you will have a lot of the mental models and concepts that all the experts have. Like,
right.
And you can do that in 30 days.
It's why the books are being written.
Important to know.
Right.
Yeah.
So someone has to live and breathe a particular subject matter for an extended period of time to be able to teach it well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But that's the point of the book, the audio book, the podcast or whatever.
Right.
All of these folks are trying to share something about what they know and they've learned and they've cultivated and they've developed and they've, reached a level of expertise on over many years or decades. They're trying to share it with you. That's the whole point. And so take advantage of it. So, they're delivering it in a way where it's like, hey, it took me 40 years to be able to get to the point where I could write this 230-page book on how to effectively help someone going through grief or whatever the subject matter is.
Right.
And the book is designed to help you as somebody who doesn't study that, doesn't have a PhD in that, hasn't lived and breathed it for 30, 40 years, to be able to understand, to your point, the basic mechanics and to be able to actually put them into practice. Yeah. And so I think there's so much that's available. The resources are so plentiful. They're so easy to access, so inexpensive to access. I mean, today people can take college courses for no credit, for no charge. People can, all kinds of things. And so we're living in an age where it's easier than ever to gain knowledge that's really going to help you. And again, when we're specifically talking about leadership here, what I want to know about future leaders is, do they actually care about other people? Are they willing to put in the work, the time, the effort to put themselves in a better position to more effectively love, care, support, motivate, encourage, challenge, hold accountable, communicate, etc., to the people around them? Yeah. And so leadership isn't about a role or a title. It's about your effectiveness with human beings. Mm-hmm. And so are you willing to put in the work? Do you have a track record of putting in the work to put yourself in a position to lead well? Yeah.
All right. Watching the time, I have one question I got to ask you, because I think it's so poignant.
Down to one question? There's a lot of pressure on this. You've thought through all the questions we could ask. This is
actually, I regret this. Let's just end the pod here. Levi, thanks for coming. You're talking about problem solving, and I have often struggled with my own team and then also with clients in helping just reframe what we're dealing with and say, just incremental, a little bit more hard work, or one more person, or just grinding it out for another 30 days. And can solve this. We need to step back and think bigger. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's all about, understanding what the anchor is and adding a 0, like 10xing that problem.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I'm just going to start repeating what you said. That's a lot more intelligent. Tell me about 10x problem solving.
I like easy techniques. Okay.
Yeah, seriously. What's 10x problem solving?
So 10x problem solving is a technique that I use and advocate or people use, which is when you're dealing with a particular business problem. So it could be, how do we get these 20 customers that come in every day into our pickup yard, handled well and processed in a, efficient, customer-friendly manner. And so to your point, they're just thinking about an incremental step and improvement, right? So little bitty ideas start getting thrown out. And it's not that they're bad, but if I'm in the room, what I'm interested in is, how do we make a potential leap forward? And so what I find is most helpful to just, in a heartbeat, change how people perceive the problem is I just go up to the board and add a 0. And so I just say, okay, so what if we weren't dealing with 20 customers, but we had 200? I know that 200 is an outlandish number, but let's work from that perspective instead of 20. So if we had 200 customers, how would we handle this? And it's unbelievable. I mean, in a moment, people will focus on trying to solve that problem, and all of a sudden they're willing to leave behind all of these anchors and these perspectives about where they're at now and all these small incremental, improvements and steps. And they're thinking about 200 and they're like, well, my gosh, I mean, we would need a completely different type of signage. We would need a different queue. We would need a texting platform with geofencing so we knew that they were coming and we could, queue them up. We would need these type of auto alerts or whatever. And what you'll find is not all of those ideas should be implemented, of course, because we don't have 200. But what you'll find is it got you to a different level of thinking to allow you to take a leap forward. And there are 4, 5, 6, absolute gems that you get out of, thinking from that perspective. And then you go back and you apply it to your 20 customer problem. And you end up with a lot better solution that is usually more future proof because you've already sort of built in some scalability. So you're not just back the next year solving the next problem because they're like, well, wait a minute, Brad. Now, instead of 20 customers a day, we have 22. And our solution for handling 22 customers is no longer sufficient because they just made 10% improvements.
Right. Yes.
Right. It sounds comical, but that's in reality what happens over and over and over again. So if you work from that 10x problem solving perspective, you're building in some scalability. It's stretched thinking. And I find the reason I use it is it just in an instant, people, they almost view it as so outlandish. It's like, okay, well, let's go to this little fantasy world and we'll figure out how we solve customer pickup if we're the Jetsons. And, right. You get a completely different type of thing, problem solving approach. And so that's, what I use to try to, get us to stretch thinking instead of step thinking.
Yeah. And no, that's really good. I didn't catch that. I mean, if you said that before, I didn't catch that. Is that difference between stretch thinking versus step thinking. And I think I fall into that trap myself, which is, all right, we're going so fast. We're going so busy. Let's just try to solve this problem. How do we solve this one? As opposed to someone says, Hartman, what do you think the likelihood is as we continue to grow? We're going to be dealing with this problem just incrementally higher within the next 6 months. I'm like, oh no, we're probably going to deal with it in 90 days.
Right.
Then what are we doing? Right.
Do we have that much time on our hands?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right. I lied. You and I both love bugs.
Okay. Bonus question. Bonus question.
You have done this before with legends. That's right, Levi. Bonus question. Because you know what a bonus question is, I can tell you are an OG podcaster here. I'm going to be looking for 2 books here. One, kind of a classic, kind of all-time book that you'd recommend that you'd say, hey, if you haven't read this leadership book, or one book that really influenced your leadership style. The other one, maybe a more recent book that you would say, hey, I read this, I don't know, whatever, last few months, last year or so, or last week, that you'd recommend to a friend.
Yeah. So I think the book I find myself recommending the most is The Advantage, Patrick Lencioni. So I think it's the most complete explanation of what a healthy culture, 1, looks like, and 2, how to practically move towards actually putting that in place, getting to that point, achieving that. And so to me, culture is the ball game. So one of the things that we talk about here is that the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. And I think that is a critical math equation that a lot of businesses and business leaders do not understand. The customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. The employees are the ones that are actually delivering the experience to your customers every day. And so what a lot of businesses spend time and effort doing is figuring out how to hold their employees accountable, motivate them, dangle bigger carrots in front of them, all these things to try to get them to behave in a way that's desirable for the business and for, what they want to deliver to customers. What they fail to do is actually examine whether that's how employees are being treated every day. So the question we're asking is, and we'll literally put this on a whiteboard, here are all the things we want customers to experience for this particular team, department, location, transaction, whatever. What are we doing day in, day out to make sure that on a one-to-one basis, our employees are experiencing the exact same thing? And if they're not experiencing it, how in the world are we going to police them enough, dangle big enough carrots, hold them accountable enough and all that to make sure that that's what they deliver to the customers. If instead we focus our time and attention on just making sure that the employees actually experience that every day, you don't even have to instruct them to deliver that to customers. They just do it naturally. So culture for me is an absolute critical piece of running a business and setting up or maintaining, growing a successful business. And I think his book is really the best on the subject from a holistic standpoint. And then my answer to your second question, recent book that I've read. And this is where I would say I was listening to a podcast just yesterday. I try to practice what I preach. I spend all my commute time listening to podcasts. I barely know what's going on in the world of sports and other things, even though I enjoy watching the games. So I'm not that great, for the bar chatter on latest trade talks. But in terms of podcasts, I was listening to one podcast that Simon Sinek did with Brene Brown and Adam Grant.
Yes. Somebody just yesterday was talking about the same thing.
It's great. Yeah. So I've only listened to part one.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to part two yet. But one of the things they talked about, or they spend a lot of time talking about, is just, creativity. How do you actually cultivate creativity? What is it? Can you put your finger on it?
Yeah.
And one of the things that they talked about that really resonates with me is if you want to be creative, you want to be a creative problem solver, you want to be able to, think outside the box, so to speak, you want to be good at stretch thinking, you want to be able to innovate, sort of on demand, you have to expose yourself to a really diverse set of ideas, experiences, perspectives. All of that breadth is what really sort of feeds the creativity. And so they were making that case in a variety of ways. So to that end, a book that I've read recently, because I try to, I go to conferences that have nothing to do with our business. I read books that have nothing, I want to stretch. Yeah. So I really have enjoyed McConaughey's Green Lights.
Okay.
So have you listened to this book? That's sounding like a no, like a resign.
No.
That's a resigned no.
I've listened to two different long podcasts.
Do you want to apologize on air here? Or?
I feel guilty even saying this.
Yeah, no, you look
so
guilty.
When the book comes, yes, I am. I'm probably blushing. The book comes out, I'm like, all right, another actor writes a book. And I'm like, already kind of biased against it. He's on, I think he's on the Tim Ferriss podcast. He's another one.
Yeah, he made the rounds.
He made the rounds, and I heard him speak twice on it. Both times, I'm like, I should buy this book. And I'm like, I was all in because I thought he was so impressive at telling his story. And I think I probably, I didn't know he went to UT too. Like, yeah. I was probably dismissing him as a simple actor. Anyway, okay. I'm sharing too much.
Well, I think that's easy to do.
Yes.
So here, I'll tell you, here's why I liked it. One, you should absolutely listen to the audiobook. Don't buy the book. He narrates it. Right.
He is
and
pretty
so
great. Yeah.
Anytime you have an outstanding narrator, just brings out another sort of perspective in the book. So he narrates his own book and, does a great job doing that. But I think has a very interesting story. He's a good storyteller. Yeah. So it's good to just see storytelling modeled. I think that's a critical communication tool. You've got to be able to communicate in story for people to understand what you're talking about and to remember what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so he's a very good storyteller. So I think for anyone that's interested in sort of seeing that, in practice and to just kind of be able to glean from that, he's explored a lot of different things. And so, again, I think in one book, you hear a lot of things you wouldn't hear anywhere else. And I think it's also interesting that, whatever perceptions you come into listening to that book about Matthew McConaughey or actors in general or celebrities or whatever, I think it comes across as a very honest book that's appropriately self-deprecating where it should be. Mm-hmm. And it's about someone who is focused on the journey rather than the destination, someone who is a lifelong learner, someone who has pursued experiences, who has worked to accelerate their learning curve, and who has an idea about what they're trying to become in life, what they're trying to achieve, what they need to say no to. So a lot of stuff in there about, the correlation between saying no and being in a position where then they could say yes to something that they really wanted to. And if you don't say no to enough stuff and you don't prune, often enough, you're going to miss an opportunity to say yes because you have no space for it. All of your time's taken up, all of your attention, all of your emotional energy, whatever the case may be. And so I think it's just an interesting read. It's a very interesting audiobook because it's narrated by him. And so it's a little out of the box, but I think it's thought-provoking. So that'd be my recent one that I've really enjoyed.
Good. That would be a good kick in the pants for me because I do remember him talking about, which I didn't realize, but then I love movies and I've seen obviously a lot of them, but where he was talking about the risk of starting to say no because he was getting typecast as basically the rom-com. Yeah. And finally he just said no. And they're like, you're not going to get any phone calls.
Right. And there's a multi-year drought.
Yes. And he goes years.
Right.
With no. And all he did was just say no. And he told his agent,
maybe my career's over.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, I think, for us that have gone through, starting something new, starting a new business, starting a new department, changing structure here, we can all relate to that of, it's been good to get us here, but it also takes a lot of courage to stop and go say, I'm going a different direction and I got to start saying no to that. So I just remember hearing that too and thinking, gosh, yeah, that's such a obviously very public for him too. So,
yeah. So I think one last comment I'll make about that and why I explore, and again, what Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, Adam, Grant in their podcast, what they said, also resonated with me is I think, if I explore diverse experiences, ideas, expose myself to things, again, outside of this industry, outside of other experiences I've had, or read, books that aren't per se leadership or management books or whatever, what I'm forced to do is to apply what I'm seeing or experiencing in a different context into the context I'm actually living. And when you're forced to make that application, you sort of translate in a more intentional way than you do when you're just, serve something sort of on a silver platter because it's what it's the industry you're in, it's what you've always heard. And so there's an intentionality that comes with having to translate. And so I think that's an important part about how you maintain a creative, muscle. And again, I think it's important as a leader, you want to be able to come in and help spur creative, innovative solutions. Again, be able to take leaps forward, stretch thinking and stuff. And if you just, live and breathe, in the same fishbowl all the time, that's going to be really hard to do. So he's got an inspiring story in that regard. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey man.
And I don't want you to feel guilty,
I don't. I'm going to go buy. This gives me another reason to buy another book.
This could be very freeing for you.
That's what it's all about. Trying to be free. Freedom is discipline. There you go. Thank you very much. I love this conversation, and I have no doubt we still got like another 29 questions. We'll do that for a round two. But Levi, thank you so much.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure, and look forward to sitting down and talking again. Thanks.
Well, dear listener, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Levi Smith. And if you did, please leave a quick review. Those mean more to us than you know. So whether it's Apple or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever the hell you're listening to this sort of thing, those reviews are extremely valuable. If you wouldn't mind doing that, I would appreciate it. Also, we are going to share some of the nuggets that Levi shared in our conversation in our newsletter, which is the Construction Leadership Newsletter. It is free. It comes out every other week where we bust our tail to make this the most helpful and valuable leadership newsletter you get. You can simply go to bradleyhartmanandco.com and you can scroll down to the bottom of any single page and sign up very easy. And in the event that you feel that I did not live up to my potential and it was not worth your time and attention, you can unsubscribe with one click, but you can be sure that every other week that we put it out, I've done my darndest to make sure it is worth your time and attention. So that is the Construction Leadership Newsletter. And again, we want this to be the best podcast you listen to. So if you have ideas for improvements, suggestions to make it more valuable to you, topics, guests, etc., do not hesitate to email me directly at bradley@bradleyhartmanandco.com. And if you did find it valuable, again, leaders in our industry look to people like you to figure out what they should be listening to, reading, and watching. Therefore, do not hesitate to share this podcast with them. And if you realize that you are not organizing and valuing your sales pipeline in this recessionary period, you need to solve that immediately. Check out thesimplesalespipeline.com. We've worked with GCs and builders and dealers and distributors. We've worked with all our clients to make this easy so we can understand what is going to happen in the future. And if we don't like the way which we are trending, we can start changing our behaviors now. In every single recession, there are companies that grow and grow significantly, and they don't do it by luck. They do it by changing their behaviors, understanding their sales pipeline, and attacking aggressively. So investigate the simple sales pipeline. All right, my friends, that's all we've got. We're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.